Well, I didn't expect the first one down here, but I disagree with you on a couple points, Ben.
Sure.
First, let me introduce myself. My name is Cash Jackson. I'm a retired Navy veteran. And
well, thank you for your service.
Thank you. I am also intending on running for governor 2018 here in the state of Illinois. And I wanted to specifically address where you spoke about victimization and people coming from impoverished neighborhoods, that poverty wasn't kind of what you equated to for criminal activity, and that addressing crime by putting more police into these inner city communities would be the resolution to said criminal activity. I just want to challenge that thought process on a couple of points.
Sure.
Beginning with my personal opinion, and some of this is going to be rooted in facts and others just in my observations,
That's fine.
is that the majority of crime that's being committed in these inner city neighborhoods, if we look at prison statistics, if we look at gang violence, we look at drug abuse, we look at teen pregnancy, suicide and depression amongst our youth, there's one common denominator. That common denominator is that these children are growing up in fatherless homes. They're growing up in fatherless homes not because fathers are not present and because we have a plethora of deadbeat fathers, which has been painted through through the media that there's millions of deadbeat fathers out there. That's simply not the truth. What is the truth is that the states have found it profitable by misappropriating Title IV-D funding through the Social Security Act from the federal government down to the states. The states take a parent, which is historically and statistically the father, they relegate them down to a visitor during a custody proceeding, such as my case. So I hope that you can smear this over your website. They reduce me down to a visitor status to justify a child support order. When they do that and they force that collection process, they receive federal funding directly to the state.
Okay, so sorry, I don't want to break up the long paragraphs there, but you know more about custody battles than I do. Okay, I will just say that obviously custody battles only take place in a situation in which there's a conflict between the spouses. I mean, I assume that you and your spouse don't get along great.
Well,
I mean,
let me finish just addressing. I know I'm long-winded.
Sorry, one more comment. The fact is that it is not custody battles. The custody battles are not the reason 70% of black kids are born out of wedlock and 40% of white kids are born out of wedlock. It's because people are having sex out of wedlock and having babies.
That's correct. But when that child support order is put in place, okay, in order to justify the support order, they have to take one parent, which historically is the father, and say, you're only going to get every other weekend. And when we do that, we have set the stage for emotional and mental challenges for those individuals. And again, if you look at teen pregnancy statistics, drug abuse statistics.
So I agree with you about the correlation between all these terrible things and single motherhood. I just disagree with you statistically that cases of father visitation in divorce cases represent even a large minority of the cases of single motherhood. Again, the vast majority of, if we're talking about the sort of culture of single motherhood that's been created in the United States, it is not about custody hearings. It is about the fact that people are getting pregnant before they're married, out of wedlock, and having babies without a father even in the home. This is not to diminish the problems in custody battles. There's no question that a lot of custody law is biased toward the mother. That's been true for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. But to pretend that that is the main problem facing inner city communities, for example, ignores the fact that the vast majority of people who are having babies out of wedlock are having them out of wedlock. They're not having them in wedlock and then dad is taking off. Dad's taking off because they never got married. Okay, this is why marriage is a prerequisite.
Well, I believe, Ben, that if you look at, say, the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, if you look at that and the crime that is there today, you can trace that back to Jim Crow, to the war on drugs, to mass incarceration. And when fathers were taken out in large numbers over a long duration, you now have set the stage where you have so many children being had out of wedlock because the family unit has broken down in these
No, the increase in single motherhood is not based in Jim Crow. Because the fact is that at the end of Jim Crow, the black single motherhood rate was 20%. Today it's 72%. Okay, so did society get more racist? How did that happen? Was it just a ticking time bomb that they left under the kitchen table? The fact is that people are having babies out of wedlock now because there are government structures in place that basically incentivize people to have babies out of wedlock, and that's the real problem. Now, in terms of crime, obviously crime is involved with single motherhood. What I'm suggesting is that there are two ways to tackle this problem. One is a broader cultural critique in which we say to people, you need to get married, and that means getting people involved in church and synagogue, getting people involved in a social network that encourages people to get married before they have babies. That's a long-term project because it takes 100 years for an entire society to devolve to the point where a majority of babies are being born out of wedlock in a community, or a vast minority in the white community. That's one way to tackle it. A shorter-term way to tackle crime is to put all the criminals in prison. Because again, I think that sets off a chain reaction that's actually good. And the chain reaction is that now you can have businesses invest. I'm not going to take my money and invest in a store that I think is going to be robbed tomorrow because the crime rate is high. I'm only going to invest where I think the cops are going to protect. And if there are no cops there to protect, it's hard for me to invest. Once I invest, that creates a property tax base or a local taxation base. And now you actually have the money, if you want a good public school, to actually put together a good public school. So all of these things need to happen at once. But the only quarrel I have with you at all is I think that you're taking an anecdote and expanding it out statistically where that's not actually statistically valid.
So you don't believe that the federal incentives to the states, for the states to receive federal funding based on their forced collection of child support?
No, I'm not arguing with you on that. You may very well be right. I don't know enough about that to answer that question. All I'm saying is that if you're talking about child support as the lead problem in these communities, there we disagree. I'm sorry, I have to move on because there's a lot of other questions.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for your talk today, and that's coming from someone who disagrees with basically everything you say.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
But yeah,
thank you for coming.
So today you had a Twitter thread in response to Ted Lieu's comments on health insurance and the CBO report that
Yes.
came out about why pre-existing conditions should be charged more. For those with pre-existing conditions that become priced out of the market due to them being charged more, which I understand your reasoning behind, car insurance, stuff like that. I read the thread.
Well, I mean, to reiterate my point for people who don't understand, just so if you're coming in late to this conversation, Ted Lieu tweeted something out about how it's ridiculous basically for insurance companies to charge people with pre-existing conditions more, to which I said, it's an insurance company, of course it does. I mean, every insurance company in history charges people more based on their risk profile. That's why you have risk assessors at insurance companies. So go ahead.
Yeah, my question is for the people who are priced out of the market
Yes.
due to that, is their only solution to go without health care? And why do you think that's an acceptable solution when most other nations have found a solution?
No, I don't think that's an acceptable solution. I think what we need to do is we've trained now 3 generations of Americans to be dependent on the government to fill that gap. So there are a couple of ways that you can tackle these issues. The chief problem, and I think we all acknowledge this, is that people don't buy. Let's say that everyone were age 0 for a second. Okay, everyone was born today. How do you solve the healthcare problem? You don't really have to solve the healthcare problem because people, presumably, you train them to buy insurance when they're young. The big problem is people don't buy insurance when they're young. Now they're 60, they don't have insurance, they have pre-existing conditions, and now no one's going to cover them, right? So we all know that the problem in the future is not going to be people who are 65 because in 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, they'll be dead, right? The big problem is going to be people who are 20 who are not getting health insurance now, and then in 40 years they have a pre-existing condition, they look for health insurance. So if we're talking about the future and the future plans for healthcare, what we need to be doing is encouraging young people to buy health insurance. Well, there are only 2 ways to do that. One is to use the government to force people to buy health insurance, and the other way is to basically have a market system that punishes people for not buying health insurance. Okay, the way you have a market system that punishes people for not buying health insurance is you make it very clear to people that there's a moral hazard involved here, that if you don't buy health insurance, that you're going to be paying more in the long run, so you'd better, pay health insurance right now and make smart decisions about it. Now, for the people who fall through the cracks, as I say, there's 2 groups now that we're talking about. There's people who are old and have pre-existing conditions, and it's too late for them. What do? They can't go back to being 20 and buy health insurance when they were healthy, right? So for those people, obviously, we have to have some sort of backup that phases out over time, right? That doesn't work the same way for a 60-year-old as it works for a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old who can buy when they're healthy, because we want to encourage those people to buy, not to be relying on government. And there I'm not against the idea of a phased-out government program based on age that helps subsidize people in pre-existing condition situations. And the other thing is that you have to have private charity pick up the slack for a lot of this stuff. And this is where I've said that I think that private charity does pick up the slack for a lot of things. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel made obviously a big to-do when he did a routine on his show in which he talked about how his baby son had been born. They took him to Children's Hospital. He had an open heart surgery. And that's why you need Obamacare. Okay, Jimmy Kimmel didn't have Obamacare. Jimmy Kimmel had private insurance. The fact is that private insurance, which covers the vast majority of the market, is still covering of pre-existing conditions because when you are employed and you have insurance, you're pooled with all the other employees of your company. That's the way it works. right? They don't charge you more with a pre-existing condition, at least in huge numbers, when you're getting it through your employer. So that's problem number one with Jimmy Kimmel is he already had health insurance. The problem number two that he didn't mention is that Children's Hospital is a charity hospital. A lot of people are coming in there with Medicaid, and the only way that people can get covered is not just through Medicaid, it's because there's a bunch of charity that's coming in and supplementing the Medicaid to pay the doctor. I know this because the doctor who operated on Jimmy Kimmel's son is a guy named Vaughn Starnes, and he operated on my daughter when she was a year and a half old. So we were at the same hospital with the same doctor. The vast majority of patients there, I believe, were on Medicaid. And they were able to get care because of the charity that was involved. So my solutions are twofold. There's a long answer, but it's a complex question. So the answer is, one, private charity needs to be increased so that we can help pick up the slack, because if that doesn't happen, conservatives, note to us, we need to give more charity, because if we don't do it, the government's going to try to. Okay, and solution number two is that we have to have a phased out program that takes care of the people for whom it's too late to actually make good decisions, but still encourages people to make good decisions now about buying their insurance, which means there must be a risk attached to not buying insurance.
One last
yeah,
comment.
sorry.
Just one ending comment. Two things. First of all, if you're encouraging people to buy health insurance, at the age of 20 or an age like that, they're not going to have, the income or the percentage to donate as much to a better insurance plan,
You don't need a terrific insurance plan when you're 20. You need a catastrophic insurance plan when you're 20. And the truth is that most of the time you need a catastrophic insurance plan generally. You shouldn't have to go to an insurance company if you have a flu. Yeah. You should be able to go to a doctor and pay cash.
And also, when you're 20, there are still people with pre-existing conditions that would jack up those costs, and getting it early might not help.
100%. But again, this is a time lapse question, because the fact is that my daughter was covered under my insurance, right? If you're under 20, you're covered on your parents' insurance typically. So, thank you.